Dan Bongino is on the line with us, former Secret Service agent, former New York Police Department officer, former candidate for the United States Senate, as I recall, and radio host and author of a book, Life Inside the Bubble. His website, Bongino, Bongino.com. Dan, welcome back.
Always good to talk to you, Tom.
Great having you. You were running for the Senate, not the House, right?
I ran for Senate and the House.
Okay.
Senate, we got,
cool.
They ate our lunch pretty bad. The House race, we almost won. We lost by 1 point, but
wow.
silver medals in politics. So
well, keep it up. You know, it's
we're trying.
Abe Lincoln lost a whole bunch of elections before he made it, and so did Bernie Sanders, for that matter.
Sure
tell me about this sheriff who has like gone, kind of bat guano crazy about President Obama saying, "Sorry, your police department can't have any more military tanks."
Well, listen, the issue of military surplus equipment appearing with civilian law enforcement agencies is an old one. It became a big issue, as many know, after Ferguson and Baltimore. And I think it became a big issue because of the prevalence of 24-hour cable media and social media, where people can now see what was happening for a very long time. I mean, this isn't a new phenomenon. The fact that you've seen it on Twitter pictures makes it appear new to some. And Tom, I have to tell you, I'm sharing, I think, with you some politics on the libertarian front. I think, you would consider yourself left and me right, but I think there are some things we agree on, war on drugs and some issues, some law enforcement issues. It can be disturbing to see that, military fatigues, military-type equipment on civilian streets. But I can't emphasize to you enough that this is one that's been happening for a very long time. And secondly, it's not so much the equipment. It's, as I told your producer, it's the rules of engagement that matter. It's the rules on using that equipment. Countries have nuclear weapons right now, including the United States. But let's be honest, the majority of Americans don't sit up at night, every night, worrying about a nuclear attack because the rules of engagement are pretty clear. And I think we have to apply the same principle to this equipment. It can be valuable, but in a very limited, very specific and defined role, I guess is the way to sum it up.
Yeah, but there's a difference between countries deciding to engage in nuclear war, where you've got, large consensus and fairly high level of transparency, and a local police department deciding to use weapons of war against their civilians with basically no answerability to anybody. So maybe I'm totally agreeing with you. It sounds.
No, I think we are. We're agreeing. One that you mentioned a couple words that we do agree on: transparency. The rules should be transparent. For riot control, if you're keeping officers safe who are having bottles and rocks thrown at them, we have to ask ourselves: do you want them in a Bearcat or behind a Bearcat? Or do you want them out there potentially using lethal weapons? I mean,
but there's a third option, Dan, and that is: do you want them out there at all? I mean, there is a relatively growing, as far as I know, body of police evidence. I mean, among law enforcement scholars, shall we say, arguing that a dramatic police presence inflames a riot situation rather than suppresses it, and that if you want a riot situation to do the least amount of damage possible, rather than showing up with overwhelming police presence, what the police should be doing is working throughout the community to get people the hell out of there, that the buildings might catch on fire. Look out. Let's try and save as many lives as possible. And that makes the rioters look like, criminals and look bad, and it puts the police on the side of the people. And there have been times, in large part, when they were riots being done by white people rather than black people, and I'm talking about back in the 1930s in particular, there have been times when that's exactly how it played out. There have been other times, of course, you go back to the turn of the 20th century, the labor riots. Again, this was mostly white folks, and where they got mowed down by guns by police departments for demanding, unionization rights. This is pre-1935. So we have a long history of looking at how police interact with a large number of really outraged people, and there's that, and then there's also the issue of it's toys for boys, Dan. If you've got these things, you want to use them, and.
Well, Tommy, a couple things. Number one, I personally am not, concerned so much with the melanin component of the skin of the rioters. I'm concerned with, the best response, for providing law enforcement protection to innocent people who may be caught up in this. And I can tell you from personal experience, having been involved with the Rudy Giuliani administration as a New York City cop, and then having been a citizen in New York during the David Dinkins administration, where civil unrest was only a few months away, depending on what the issue was. The Giuliani administration policy was the first person to throw a bottle gets locked up, the second person who throws a bottle gets locked up, and down the line, and the riots were far less severe, and contrasted to the alleged Dinkins response, which was let them burn off some steam. That burn off some steam at whose expense? I mean, there are people in the general public who are entitled to police protection who may not care at all about the issues in these riots. They may not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean their store should be burned down. So I disagree. And secondly, on the equipment front, listen, these weapons are out there. Regardless, this isn't a conversation about gun control. I get that, getting into any of that. But weapons are out there. There are 300 million weapons in the United States.
No, I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about, tanks and these giant, laser heat, missile things. And, weapons of war.
Right. Well, that can be a misleading term as well. I mean, weapons of war, what does that really mean? All I'm concerned about are the technical capabilities of the weapon. What are we going to do with our law enforcement officers, if need be, to make sure that they can get in and out of a situation safely? So the perfect example of this is, because this gets, when it comes to civil unrest, understandably, it becomes a different conversation. Look at the L.A. bank robbery. What did you want those officers to do? They had Beretta. I think it was Beretta. It was definitely 9mm. They had 9mm handguns. They were fighting two guys in a body armor who took down basically an entire city with a Kalashnikov rifle. These weapons are out there, regardless of your stance again on gun control. Now that's a different conversation. They're there. They're not going to magically disappear due to legislation. Our cops have to be able to fight back. Now again, we agree that we have to be very, very careful with the use of these types of military-grade weapons on civilian streets. We are still a constitutional republic. But having said that, what's your practical policy suggestion in the event two bank robbers in body armor with Kalashnikovs are walking down a city street shooting innocent people? Have cops go in with, a level 2A vest and a 9mm? I have news for you. That AK-47 will go through that bulletproof vest that every cop wears like a hot knife through butter. It'll go through 4 or 5 of them before it stops. So people have the right to be protected by law enforcement, but the transparency about the rules of engagement has to be clear. And I think that conversation about using this type of equipment in a civil unrest scenario where tensions are high is a very valuable one, because I think you're right in some respects. Having people show up in military fatigues with a Bearcat gives the impression that there's some kind of civilian occupation going on.
Right.
And we have to be very careful about that.
A military occupation. This is, I guess, the blurring point that we're hitting here is the kind of the posse comitatus thing. At what point do our police departments and frankly our military, because the National Guard has been involved in some of these things, at what point do they go from protect and serve to occupy and control?
Well, I think that happens when it's clear that they've lost control of the situation, and that's kind of like what did that old Supreme Court justice say about pornography? When you see it,
right.
You can't really explain when they lost control, but when it happens. Police departments typically do.
But my point is that a lot of this equipment is what's provoking that loss of control.
I don't know. I disagree with that. I think these are really. Have you ever read The Black Swan by Nicholas Taleb? He's very clear that it's very easy for us to do some kind of pseudo historical analysis and say this caused that.
Right.
The truth is, Tom, neither you nor I understand what really caused this. There were a number of variables in Baltimore and Ferguson. Everything from cops giving traffic tickets in Ferguson and using the citizens as a money mill to racial tensions that were old. This
right.
was it may have been a role, but I think it's overly simplistic.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a thoughtful conversation. I don't profess to have all the answers, Dan. I just am very uncomfortable about weapons of war on our streets, whether they're in civilian or police hands. Dan Bongino, Bongino.com is the website. Thanks, Dan.
You got it. See ya.
Good talking with you.